CJOB and the news. We appreciate what you do day in and day out, not only for your students moving the needle on COVID education, but for us at Global News. Raywat, good afternoon, and thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon.
When we look at the landscape of those who are vaccinated, and our colleague Brittany Greenslade will have more coming up at 5 o'clock, but those who are eligible that are 17 and younger, so the 12 to 17-year-olds, are we getting the take-up of our teenagers on vaccinations that we need in this country?
Well, what do we need? We need pretty much all of them to be vaccinated, so we're not getting that. We're getting a fair number. Is it enough to keep the schools safe? I don't know. It's not ideal. And absent sufficient take-up by that demographic, we need to wrap the schools in more public health assets. I'm not seeing the latter happen. I'm not seeing sufficient investment in school safety to accommodate the lack of vaccination amongst the young people. So,
and I'm looking at Atlantic Canada and pockets there where, masking up, that we're starting to see kids in some school districts get it there, and I guess across the country as well. So that's evidence that it's coming from outside, getting inside, and then boom, that's what we're starting to see.
Exactly right. It's the same story we've seen pretty much throughout the entire pandemic, is that schools are not bulletproof, they're not magical unicorns, and they are venues for internal transmission and possible pandemic acceleration. So this is a big deal.
Do you still see the cases in the schools as a function of what's happening in the community, meaning the kids are picking it up in the community and ultimately bringing it to school, not getting it in school necessarily and taking it out to the community?
That's a tough one. All three are happening. They are getting it from outside the community, they are transmitting within the schools, and they probably are transmitting it outside the schools back into the community. Although I think that last one might be lesser now because parents, for the most part, are vaccinated and have more resilience. But I can't answer that question completely because the data is not fully in yet. But definitely we're seeing them bring it in from outside. And so that says to me that we have a failure of inculcating sufficient immunity in the community. Adults are not stepping up to vaccinate.
We are seeing here in Manitoba, much like other childhood vaccinations, that this will be offered in schools. That is not new. This obviously will be added to the program, but I know I got my polio vaccine in school, and kids have received the HPV one in schools as well. Is that key to reaching that younger demographic, especially as we believe that we're going to be on the cusp of Health Canada approving a vaccine for those 5 and up?
It certainly helps. You have to think about who the people are who have not yet been vaccinated and why they haven't been vaccinated. For some of them, it's an access and ease issue. And for that portion of the unvaccinated, this will definitely help. So maybe they couldn't schedule it. Maybe they don't know where to get it. Maybe their parents don't have time to drive them to the doctor's office, whatever it might be. This will address that demographic quite well. But for those with parents who are vaccine resistant for whatever reason, we need different tools to cajole them, better educational outreach, that sort of thing.
Ultimately, do you think, what tips the scales? Do we know the percentage of people who will just say no matter what you do, whether you dangle a financial carrot, $1 million prize, if you take away their ability to eat in a restaurant, if you take away the ability to watch their kids play sports in an arena, that nothing that you do will convince that population? Do we know what that number is?
We don't know. However, if you look at other vaccines, like the MMR vaccine, the hardcore resistors are a tiny number. And if we get it down to that number, we can manage it. And the way we get it down there is through time. Over time, people will see that the COVID vaccine is like the MMR vaccine. It's safe, maybe even safer. It's effective, maybe even more effective, and totally acceptable. So it's a function of time, frankly. Unfortunately, because we don't have a lot of time. We're always racing the clock here. But ultimately, I think we'll get to the same level of resistance that other vaccines see, and that's minimal, but not ideal.
With Raywat Deonandan from the University of Ottawa, Richard and Julie with you on 680 CJOB. Interestingly enough, Moderna is working on a flu-COVID vaccine combo. What do you know about that?
Well, I know it's a good idea. The application of the mRNA platform to different diseases was inevitable, and we're looking at a brand new era in vaccine technology as a result. The flu vaccine doesn't match well with the circulating strains every year. We get maybe 40% match in a good year because by the time we've identified the circulating strains and made a vaccine, the strains have changed again. With the mRNA technology, we can more easily target the circulating strains and have a far more effective vaccine. And if you make it multivalent, you slide in the COVID as well, people just need to get one shot and they're protected against multiple diseases with higher efficacy. So it's good news all the way around.
And is that because of the technology and combined with that, the turnaround time on this?
Yeah, it's the technology that allows a turnaround time. So a shorter window of development and production. Now, if we throw in greater distribution infrastructure, then we are golden.
Because this is key for, and I don't want to say it, but I have to say it, for the next pandemic, the next wrench that they throw at us, because, while we could be out of this in months, we may still have a variation of this for years.
Right. The next pandemic may or may not be a coronavirus. It might be influenza virus. But the key is to have sufficient infrastructure on the ground so we can produce vaccine and distribute really, really quickly. That means every country must have a manufacturing center or one nearby that is fully staffed and resourced, etc. And we have to be able to throw a lot of money at the problem early on so we get a vaccine candidate quickly, like we did with COVID. This remarkable turnaround was a result of throwing a lot of money at the problem. We can do that for a lot of diseases now that we know how it's done.
Right. And we should say a lot of money was thrown at a lot of different scientists in a lot of different countries. And there's just a huge pool of volunteers willing to try it so they can get things done more quickly. It's not that they cut corners. It's just that we're all affected by it. And so it makes it easy for the research to happen. And that research continues to be ongoing, and they are still looking at booster doses and who needs what. And it looks like NACI's recommendation is that certain Canadians get a third dose. Your thoughts on the immunocompromised and them potentially getting a third shot?
Yeah, that's the right thing. So the immunocompromised who did not mount an immune reaction to the first 2 doses, they get that third dose as part of their prime series. It's not even considered a booster, because they haven't got sufficient immunity to be boosted yet. So for them, we're trying to get that initial spike up that can be boosted later on, possibly. For the rest of us, we have been boosted. We have sufficient immunity for the most part, especially the cellular immunity, T cells and B cells, to allow us to respond to infection months from now. It may not prevent infection, but it certainly will prevent serious disease. That's how the cellular arm of immunity works. If we get a third booster, the rest of us, that might prevent infection initially as well. But that shouldn't be the priority. The priority should be protect the immunocompromised and get a first and second dose into the rest of the world so that they do not become variant farms and prolong this pandemic needlessly.
And it's not unusual for some vaccines to require a triple dose for people.
Oh, absolutely not. So hepatitis requires 3, polio requires 4, I think. It's not unusual at all. In fact, it's quite common. The reason is you need time to mature the reaction. You need time in between doses for the inflammation to come down. So vaccine science is complicated and nuanced and a bit of an art as well, as we're seeing in real time with COVID. They tried out the 3-week interval, not because that was going to be ideal, because that was what they went with. And now we're learning 3 weeks is probably not the best interval to go with. So there's a bit of trial and error involved, but that's the nature of science. And none of this is unusual.
4:45 on 680 CJOB with Raywat Deonandan from the University of Ottawa. At this point, when you scan not just countrywide but worldwide, what are you looking out for right now as far as fourth wave is concerned, and what is concerning you?
I'm looking out to see if the wave diminishes in certain countries, not in reaction to mitigation strategies. For example, in India, it seems to have come down somewhat, and I wonder if that's because so many people have been infected that there is sufficient natural immunity now in the population to allow that to happen. And the reason that is interesting is that might happen in Canada, where the Delta might tear through the unvaccinated so quickly and leave in its wake a lot of suffering, but also a lot of immunity, so that maybe we get back to normal-ish faster than we thought. So I'm on the lookout to see if that happens around the world. And by the way, that's not a strategy that I would advise because it comes at a price of human suffering and death, but it will result in the quashing of the wave relatively quickly. And I'm looking to see if we can deliver a vaccine quickly around the world. And I'm excited to see some countries are making better deals with a variety of manufacturers. I'm excited to see that the Chinese are trying to mix their vaccine with the mRNA ones to see if they can be boosted by comparative vaccines. As we mix and match the strategies, I think we're going to find a remarkable array of tools to help combat this worldwide.
Always love talking to you about these things because there's never a shortage of things to talk about. Ray Deonandan, thanks for doing this. Always appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.